Hey everyone, how are you doing today? On today's video, you can see I'm back in my old setup because I found a way around the whole not having a camera stand. So that's pretty awesome, and I'm really happy with that because it means that I can finally stand up again so I can like move and do things as I'm talking to you. Whoop, 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 whoop. On today's video, I am going to be going through my autumn wrap up. Yes, I'm saying autumn wrap up, not my November wrap up, for reasons that I will divulge in a second. Autumn for me this year wasn't the best for reading. My mental health took a huge hit sort of in this summer, and I was still recovering from that in the coming into autumn. My depression was really struggling, my migraines were getting worse. I spent far too much time playing Genshin Impact, but essentially in the last like 6 months I've probably lost half my life to this game, and I was like, okay, this isn't a healthy spiral, I need to get out of this. September I made a pretty good effort. I read 5 books. October I did 2, and then November I did 4 books. I only did 11 books in total throughout the entirety of those 3 months, which I'm still happy with because it's better than nothing. But when I think back to like January, February, where I think February I did 16 books in that month, and to have done 11 over 3 months, I'm a little bit like, So thankfully I can announce that things are going a lot better in December. I'm already on, I think, my 5th read. I'm going to kickstart with September. September, like I said, I wanted to kind of put a bit more of an effort in, and I started reading I carried on reading from, I think, June, The Prison Healer by Lynette Noni. It was one of those books that I started, was kind of a bit about, wasn't really too interested, and then I put it down, and then I was like, right, okay, I really need to start finishing some books. So I picked it back up, and I was a lot more into it the second time round. By the end of the book I was really hooked, and it definitely had one of those endings that had me going, what the actual... And I kind of screamed at the book for like 5 minutes going, I can't believe that, because one of the things I'd already kind of figured out. The other thing I did not see coming, and it smacked me like a train, and I was like, okay, wow, okay, now I've gone from being a little bit not sure if I care about this book to I need to know what happens next. I'm not normally a fan of cliffhanger endings for that exact reason, but this one did get me, and I'm like, okay, I need to try this. And that one I ended up rating on CorePile, which, you know, is the scoring system that I use that was coined by Book Roast. On CorePile it scored an 8 out of 10, and so that meant it was smack on 4 stars. Throughout the majority of the book it was teetering on a 3.5, but then towards the end it bumped itself up. Following that, I then read another one of my Fairy League books, and that is These Hollow Vows by Lexi Ryan. I was a little unsure at first about this one because it was about Fae, and I'm still not convinced by that whole genre. I did not enjoy The Cruel Prince. I am not really tempted by ACOTAR. I didn't really enjoy A Deal with the Elf King, I think it's called. I was a bit meh with that. And I've just never really been a big fan of the whole genre. But I am slowly starting to get into it, especially as I'm reading sort of more darker books, and they've got a little bit more to do with, they're not just pretty fairies, there's a little bit more to them. And this book definitely has solidified my interest. And it is so cool because this character literally, she just kind of blunders around the romance, doesn't really know what she's doing. And she is kind of tasked with this whole thing of trying to capture this prince's heart. And there's, again, it's one of those stories where there's a lot of twists and a lot of turns, and you guys are going to be so shocked because there is a love, as Zoe's All Booked coins it, a love V, because really there's not many books that have actual love triangles. There is a love triangle / V in there, which I normally hate, and they are normally an instant I will not read and will never pick up a book because I know it's got a love triangle. And yet it worked so well in this book. I think because it wasn't the primary focus of the book. Got light and dark elves like the shadow, I think it's like the summer court or something. Oh, the Seelie and the Unseelie court, but they're not as you are kind of led to believe. So even though the Seelie court is the light court, they're not actually that light. And it's a really interesting take on the Fae lore. So I definitely thoroughly enjoyed this one. I couldn't put it down, and when I got to the end, I immediately jumped onto NetGalley to request an arc, which I'm still waiting to hear back from, and I'm desperately hoping I get, because I will die if I have to wait. So for this one, it scored a solid 9 on the, and he said the Richter scale. You can tell I'm a geographer. That's earthquakes. Well, it was a 9 on the earthquake scale. But it was steamy without being too steamy, which was lovely. And it got a 9 on the core pile scale, which is a 5-star. So this is the first of the 5-star reads for the year. Well, for the autumn wrap up. So these Hollow Vows, Lexi Rhyme. Next we have an ebook, which is also a middle grade fantasy and was gifted to me by NetGalley, but it did take me a lot longer than I expected to get to. And that is Max and the Spice Thieves by John Peregrine. I didn't enjoy this one. I mean, I'm not a big middle grade reader anyway. My brain doesn't really do younger writing, but with this one it was just a very convoluted plot. The characters just seemed very bland and one-dimensional. The plot itself just seemed so all over the place. Like, we did 3/4 of the book in this one place, one location, and then the last quarter of the book everything just happened all at once and we were in a new location with new characters and new plot. And one of the things that I've noticed on a lot of reviews that have had the same opinion as me is the last third to a quarter to a third of the book could have been its own book and would have been better as the second book in the series. So unfortunately that one didn't really sit well with me. It was just, like I said, muddy plot that was all over the place, characters that were bland and didn't catch my attention, and a setting that quite honestly I've seen 100 times in other books in various different places, and it didn't feel unique and it didn't feel new until there was one part which then was kind of sped through. That one only scored 4.5 on core pile, which was only a 2-star. It just had too many issues for me to really care completely. Then we are moving into a series that I was not expecting to completely take over my life and leave me with a huge hangover. And that is the Plated Prisoner series by Raven Kennedy, and starts off with Guild? Yes, Guild. I read the first book earlier in the year, like a month or two before I started the second one, and I thought it was okay. Rather than a retelling, I'd say it's inspired by the tale of King Midas. And you start off with this main character, Auron, who she is like King Midas's favoured. She's the gold touched. Basically, she is his main favourite concubine. He's got all these other concubines that are called saddles. I don't really need to explain why they're called saddles. And basically she lives within this network of cages in the castle, so that she's like a bird in a little cage, and like no one can get to her and she can't get to anyone. But she's kind of allowed this because she comes from a very broken, poor, abused background, and she sees him as her saviour, and he's manipulated her into being this like little sort of dove in a cage and too scared to speak out, and she sees him as her beloved, and like you can tell there is some very, very serious Stockholm syndrome and abuse system. So this is definitely a trigger warning book because there is a lot that deals with abuse and trauma. In the first book, you've basically got Midas kills the king of another kingdom, and he goes to that kingdom to, you know, put his stamp on it and lay claim. And you've got Auron and another group of the Saddles who are being taken there in a separate convoy. That convoy gets disrupted and they find themselves being kidnapped by pirates. And right at the very end of the book, we get these people that appear on the boat, on the pirate ship, who are from the Fifth Kingdom, from the land of King Rot, who is believed to be Fey touched. He's got some magic and he is feared across all of the lands, and his general appears on the boat and is like, hey, we're taking these saddles now from you because we're going to use them as leverage against Midas. That's where the book kind of ends, is as she meets the general, and we instantly are like, okay, there is something that's going to be going between these two. It's not really a spoiler for this because the love interest is not the king. Like, he ends up not being the main interest, which is fantastic, because I was worried it was going to go there, but it didn't. So that's where the first book started. Then we have Glint, which is book 2, and follows basically Oren as she's now being held prisoner by this camp, and she gets to know the soldiers a little bit, and she gets to know the commander, and she starts to kind of break away from that conditioning of Midas, and now that she's having distance away from him and talking to other people, she's starting to understand that maybe her situation isn't what she's always believed it to be, and maybe it's time for her to kind of accept who she is and what she can do, because there are other things that go on. And then we get like this really beautiful steamy build up of a relationship that kind of leaves you hanging a little bit. And then the third book, which is called Gleam, I read in 5 hours flat, despite it being over 500 pages, because it was that good. I just zoomed through it. Is her reuniting with Midas, him basically trying to establish his control over her again, and her going, nope. Lots of things happen. There's a lot of drama. You get a kind of resolution finally to this romance that's been building for a book and a bit. It was fantastically written. It was a story of an abusee getting her power back, taking a stand against her abuser, finding new love, but then things kind of go a bit skewy towards the end, and we're left on a bit of a cliffhanger, which will be resolved in book 4, which comes out next year, and I'm actually dying because I need to read it like now. I think Guild got a 3-star because it was kind of slow and it didn't really feel like a lot was happening, but what it does do is set up everything for the next few books, which I think was perfect. But I do feel like it could have been marketed more as like a prequel book than an actual first book in the series. Glint I gave an 8 out of 10 for core pile, so 4 stars. Gleam got 9.14 on core pile and was a definite 5-star and was book of the month for September. So now we're going into October, and like I said, I only read 2 books, and one of them I just picked up on a whim when I was selling at Stoke-on-Trent. I was walking around and I just saw these really cool posters for this manga series, and I was like, oh, that looks really awesome. And had a chat with the author and I was like sold, so I bought this manga and I decided to read it as soon as I got home. That is the book Nightshade by Hannah Rose. Essentially, this is set in a city where you've got the main area that's like wealthy and people live comfortably and the police are there and actually do their job, and then there's the lawless like undercity. Basically, it is run by the gangs. The police, if you call the police from in this area, you are not going to get a response. They don't care and they are afraid because police go in there, they don't come back out. But you've got the main character, Oliver, whose grandfather was killed by this, like, the guy that basically runs the underground. No one knows who this person is apart from his pseudonym Nightshade, but everyone fears him. Like, if he tells you to do something, you do it. You don't even hesitate, you just do it. Essentially, Ollie's granddad was killed and he found out that it was due to Nightshade, so now he's trying to find out what happened, why was his granddad killed, what led to the events, like how did his granddad, who's from the nice area, end up mixed in with the underground, and all of that kind of thing. And then you get a little bit of an introduction to some of the gangs and the gang leaders. And then there was this one scene in particular that was really well done, where you've got Bella, who she's from the underground but goes to school with Oliver, and she helps him navigate all this area, and she herself, like, she doesn't take any shit, she can fight, she's a badass, and like they have this run-in with a gang leader, and essentially the only way that they're going to get out of this is if she fights like his right-hand woman, and it's brutal is all I'm going to say. And again, this one kind of leaves things very up in the air because Ollie decides that he's had enough of everything. He doesn't want to get involved anymore. And he and Bella have a really big fallout. And then the next day, Bella is found badly beaten in and basically been tossed into a giant garbage container. It gets left off with them dropping her off at the hospital and Ollie going, "I don't care," and walking away. I'm intrigued to see where this is going to go because I was really interested in the characters. This one got 7.8 on the core pile scale, so for a pretty reasonable 4 stars. Next we have, I mean, is anyone shocked that I'm going to say this author's name? Nalini Singh. Yes, that's right. And every sort of October, November, it's varied a little bit over the years, is the release of the latest in the Guild Hunter series, and this month was no exception. So my second book and the only other book that I read in October was Archangel's Light by Nalini Singh, and let me tell you now, oh boy, was the 10-year wait worth it. Like, I don't really want to give anything away for those of you that haven't even started the series yet, and it's difficult because it's like book 13 or 14 in the series, so I don't want to give, but basically a couple that many of us have been waiting and hoping for years has finally happened. And it's amazing because Nalini herself has said that she's a bit uncomfortable writing LGBT relationships because she's worried she won't be able to do them justice and won't be able to give them the same detail and attention that she gives to the other relationships within her world. And you can tell because it was much more of a slow burn, and even once the characters became established towards the end of the book, where normally you would get pretty steamy scenes and you would get quite detailed like spice and sex scenes and things like that, it felt very tame. And the other complaint that I had, that a few people have had, is it kind of felt like it ended a bit abruptly. Like, we would have loved to have seen the characters go back home and see the reactions of the rest of the characters to them finally like getting their shit together and finally admitting that they are in love. And we kind of didn't get all that, although Nalini has confirmed that she will be doing extra like bits for it. So she'll be doing, in her newsletters, she does like outtakes and extra like little snippets from her books or like just extra scenes. So she has promised us more, and we've been told that at least one more book in the series will focus on them as a couple. So, you know, I can't be too disappointed, but I can be a little bit disappointed. She didn't quite go all in, but I understand why she might hesitate. But that scored a 9.14, same as Gleam, and was a 5-star because it's very rare that Nalini doesn't get 5 stars from me. And then finally, because I'm realising this is getting quite long and it was supposed to be a lot quicker than this, we are getting on to November's reads. So starting off with my last physical book that I have on the pile, and that is Ravina The Witch by Junko Mizuno? Yes, Mizuno. I grabbed this last year from Forbidden Planet. It was in their January or Boxing Day sale. It was in their, oh my god, Kaylee. It was in their Christmas sale, and I was attracted to the cover first and foremost. Like, if you have a look at this, how awesome is this cover? And then I had a flip through, and the artwork is just so pretty, so beautiful. It's very kind of stylistic, and the colours are really lovely. It's a lot more adult than I thought it was going to be. Like, there are mentions of BDSM in here, and there is depiction of nudity. It is a really good story, and I had a lot of fun with it. The actual story itself is a little bit basic and didn't quite do a lot for me, but the artwork and the pictures and the colouring just blew me away. I loved it. So that's definitely one that I will be using a lot as more of a drawing and art reference guide than rereads. But I still think if you really like sort of like quirky, gothic-y, like dark Lolita, I would read this. Next, we have the only audiobook on this list, which was Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman and narrated by Neil Gaiman himself. This is just a collection of the Nordic tales that have been written in Neil Gaiman's own way and own style. They're very kind of quirky, it's very accessible. It's written in such a way that you don't need to know anything about the Nordic gods, so like Odin, Thor, Loki and all of that. You don't need to know anything about them to be able to read this. It's very light-hearted. It's almost written in like a bedtime story style. Like I could happily sit there and I could picture myself just sitting reading these to my kids when they're a bit older. Neil Gaiman looks and sounds scarily similar to my dad. So it kind of was a bit trippy for me at first because I was like listening to his voice and in my head I'm picturing my dad telling me these stories. And yeah, it kind of freaked me out a little bit to begin with, but I got used to it and ended up really enjoying it. That one got 7.14 and a solid 4 stars on the Corpile scale. We next have the only contemporary like romance sort of adult book on here, which is The Authenticity Project by Claire Pooley. And I surprisingly loved this book. I picked it up on a bit of a whim because I really liked the cover that I got, which had like a little bookstore and a cafe. It was like a little cafe, and the setting seemed really nice, and I really liked the premise. So essentially, one day the main character Monica, she picks up this journal that someone's left on their table, and it's called The Authenticity Project. She has a read through, and it's basically a story of this older gentleman who's who was quite a famous artist like back in his day, and he's basically telling his story, and he is saying like, you know, how well do you actually know the people around you? So here's my story and my truths that I'm afraid to say out loud. Maybe if you're brave enough you can add yours and then leave this book for someone else to find. So Monica adds in her story, and then gradually like this book makes its way around various people, and it's a fantastic story of like how this notebook brings together this group of individuals who ordinarily would never have met and would never have interacted. And you get like new romances, and you get some people who make massive life revelations. Is that the right? Revelations. And it was just fantastically well done, and it had a lot of emotions in there. I kind of, about a third of the way through the book, I was like, I've got a horrible feeling, I know what's going to happen, and I think this is going to kill me. It kind of did happen, but not in the way that I thought it would. And yes, it still killed me. I think I finished this book and spent 10 minutes crying, but it was like a real mixed kind of cry. It was like a happy, joyous, but also really sad and longing kind of cry. Definitely took me by surprise. I didn't know if I was going to like it or not. It's not typically the kind of book that I read and enjoy, but I did thoroughly enjoy this one. It got 7.79 on Corpile, so 4 stars. And I am definitely wanting to now try a couple more of Claire Pooley's books. I think she's got a couple out. I need to check. Then I did from Book Sirens, which is an ARC platform similar to NetGalley. I got an email that always lists like recommended reads, and there was this one that really intrigued me. I thought, ooh, this sounds cool. Because it was basically talking about a vampire who's been made human, but he's lost his memories and doesn't know why so many people hate him and want him dead, and he can't understand why, and it's up to this girl to try and help him. I clicked on it and realised that it was book 2 in the series, so I was like, right, well, the first book was still available, so I downloaded the first book, which was called Cracked Coffins by Veronica. I can't remember the surname, so I will put it up on the screen. I did not get on with this book at all. It was supposed to be like this girl who she gets a boyfriend, and then it turns out that he's actually a vampire, and he basically then threatens her into and manipulates her into staying with him. But I just didn't like it because she herself was like, anything that could have happened to her in the past did. Like, she was abused, she was sexually assaulted, she was into drugs. The book started with her ODing on heroin. And this was like a 17-year-old in high school. And I'm not saying these things don't happen, because they do. But it felt like all of that on top of him being a vampire, and the whole vampire thing just kind of seemed weirdly unnecessary. Like, I don't really get why that needed to even be a thing. I don't know, it just, and the actual mythology of this, of the vampire take, where their vampirism can be reversed, and there are different types of vampire. I think it felt like there was too much going on. And it just, I don't know, this book just didn't resonate with me very well. It didn't sit right with me, and I did finish it because I really wanted to, but by the end I was like, actually I really now don't want to read the second one, because from what I've read in the first one and the synopsis of the second one, I'm worried that they're going to suddenly turn him into a good guy and they're going to redeem him, and he does not deserve to be redeemed. This one got 4 on Corpile, so it's only a 2 stars. I think if the main character had been an adult and had gone through all of that stuff and was like in her 20s, I think I would have coped a lot better. But seeing all this abuse and like being threatened and choked and abused and the R word, I don't know. That happening to a kid, like, really, I just did not get on with it. Thankfully though, because I read that one and I didn't want to end the month on like a really dark, deep book, I was on NetGalley and I saw an arc for a graphic novel that really intrigued me, and so I clicked on it and I got granted it within like an hour, so I just read it on the 30th of November just to try and finish the month on a high note, and it was a high note. I forgot to write it down, so I have forgotten the author. So I will put it up here for you, and it's called Chef's Kiss, and essentially you've got this group of 20-somethings who have just finished uni, moved in together, and then you've got the one character who he doesn't quite know what he wants to do. Like, his entire life has been built up towards going into publishing, but then it seems no matter how hard he tries, he just cannot get a job in it. So he starts applying for any job he can, but even things like being a bin man, even that job he was not qualified for, and they were like, oh, what experience do you have? And he was like, none. And they were like, well, thanks for coming. And then he manages to secure a job at a small bakery, well, a small cafe, and he's never really considered going into culinary before. He does enjoy cooking, and he's quite good at cooking, and you can tell that, like, right from day one, it sparks something in him. The rest of the book is basically following him working out, well, what does he actually want in life, and also there's a slight romance that builds between him and the guy that employs him. And there's also this super cute pig who all taste testing is done through him. So basically, if he won't eat your food, the owner of the restaurant will not take you on. And I just thought that was a really hilarious concept. I thought it was quite sweet, quite cute, but also really funny and different. And this was just overall a very heartwarming, feel good. I kind of wished it was a lot longer though, because certain bits did feel like it was kind of like conflict resolved, conflict resolved. And it was like, oh, I would have liked to have had that spread out a little bit, or the build up for that be a little bit more subtle, because it kind of, one of the main conflicts that Ben has between him and one of his friends, like I think it's his best friend from childhood, I was kind of like, well, that seemed out of nowhere and unnecessarily aggressive, and I kind of wish they'd done a little bit more of a build up on that. Remember the core pile score, because it's over there, and if I try to walk past my setup right now I will make it go flying. But I do remember it was a 4 stars, and I did give it a very positive review. So those are the reads that I did during autumn. There was quite a big mix in there of extremely disappointing to the point of traumatic reads, to reads from my comfort, absolute favourite, god tier, comfort read author, and then everything in between. I got some new favourites, I got some new starting points, and I got a few arcs in there, which was quite nice. So let me know in the comments which of these books was either your favourite or least favourite. If there's any in here that you've got the same opinion or even a different opinion to me, I'm always interested to hear what you think. Don't forget, if you like this video, to press the thumbs up and then click the little subscribe button, and make sure you press that bell so you never miss a notification from me. And I will see you all on the next video. Bye! And yeah, so it's very adult.